Hello and welcome to another video review. This is King's Quest III to Heir as Human for various PC systems of the late 80s, early 90s. This is the sequel to King's Quest II Romancing the Throne, and it was released in 1986. It's kind of interesting too, because it's the very first game in the series to not feature Graham as the player character. That was kind of weird. We weren't really expecting that when it was released. It was like, a new person who isn't Graham? Well, suffice to say, the story divulges more about that, and I'll get to that more later on. But I should mention, before I actually get into the storyline, that I have a really hard time pronouncing a couple of the words in that particular storyline, and those are the name of the land that you're in. It's L-L-E-W-D-O-R. I think it's supposed to be Hludor, but I'm not really sure. And the player character's name is Gwyddion. I think it's Hwydion, but I'm not sure there either. Don't hold me to those names, because I'm not Welsh, and I'm trying to use Welsh pronunciations on them. I used to say it was Gwyddion and Ludor, so I don't know. You don't actually get pronunciation in the game. So it's confusing on that, and if I'm mispronouncing those, sorry, but I never really knew how to pronounce them back in the day. I still don't know how to pronounce them. So, yeah. Suffice to say, I'm not really going to talk about the presentation, though, because it still uses the same engine as the previous two games in the series, and as a result looks pretty much exactly the same as the previous two games, although they did change up the environments and everything as well. It still has that same level of graphical quality, so I'm not really going to mention that, and the sound is still pretty much the same. But what they did change up was, of course, the storyline. And this story is pretty interesting because, again, you're not playing as King Graham. Instead, you're playing as, again, I have problems pronouncing this name, but Hwydion? I don't know. And he is in the service of this wizard called Manannan. Or Mananan, or however you're supposed to pronounce it. I have a hard time with the names in this particular game for some reason. But suffice to say, he is pretty much a prisoner in the wizard's tower and is pretty much a slave. He just does whatever the wizard tells him to do, otherwise the wizard will just annihilate him. And so you start off the game and he basically tells you to do some mundane task around the tower, like clean the chamber pot or clean the kitchen or something like that. And so you go do that. And eventually, he takes a leave of absence. He goes off on a journey. And that gives you time to explore not only the tower, but also the land of, again, pronunciation problems, Hludor. And pretty much the entire story is how he's trying to escape from this wizard and what he does to go about escaping. And as a result, the storyline actually involves magic a bit more than the previous two games in the series. And it has less of a fairy tale vibe and more of just a standard fantasy vibe. It still certainly has that fairy tale charm to it, but it's reduced in capacity to the previous two games. So it's certainly a departure from what you saw in those previous two games as far as the general tone goes. I mean, it's still certainly very lighthearted, although it is darker than the previous two games for obvious reasons. And it's a very interesting game, because even though the story is, again, simple, it still has a lot of charm about it, and you really do get kind of engaged in it. But the gameplay is, again, pretty much exactly the same as the previous two games in the series. It's still a parser-based adventure game, and you're still moving your character around with the arrow keys, still entering commands with the keyboard, just typing stuff in, like get flask, and he'll pick up a flask or whatever. And so the thing about this particular game, though, is it actually spells things out a bit more for you. It doesn't really tell you what to do, of course, but it gives you more hints than the previous two games did, which is very, very nice. Even though you still have a lot of instances where you're not really sure what you're supposed to do at any given point, and it is still very easy to just fail miserably at this game, you get more of an idea of what you're supposed to do, because it gives you, when you look at a spell book, it gives you ingredients that you have to find. And to cast these spells, you need these ingredients. So you go out into the land of Hludor and look for these ingredients. So it's much more targeted than the previous two games. It gives you more of an idea of what to do in the game itself, rather than having to look up hints or something like that. Now, granted, there are still some puzzles in this game that don't really have obvious solutions. There's still a lot of stuff where you'll be scratching your head wondering what you're supposed to do, but it's a very nice game in that it's certainly more advanced than the previous two. And it's actually a lot easier to get into King's Quest III than it is to get into the previous two games in the series. So this is actually one I can recommend a lot more to people than the previous two games in the series, even though I'm still leaning towards recommending it only to fans of the series or fans of adventure games in general, because it is still rather difficult to get into if you're not willing to be very patient, map out what you're doing, write a lot of notes, and that sort of thing. You really do have to use skills that are not emphasized in games anymore. You really do have to do a lot of things yourself rather than let the game tell you what to do. Now, admittedly, it would be very nice to have more subtle hints as to what I'm supposed to do, but again, you can't really do anything about it since it's, so old. But suffice to say, I can certainly recommend this more than I can recommend the previous two games in the series, even though I still enjoy those quite a bit, because it's more accessible. It's much easier to figure out what you're actually supposed to be doing as your overall objective and how to go about it, rather than just wandering around like a chicken with your head cut off or something like that. But again, it still only targets a very specific type of gamer, and that's the people who are fans of the series or fans of adventure games. So they're really the only people I can recommend it to. But if you're wanting to get into a parser-based adventure game, this is probably a pretty good place to start. Thanks for watching.